Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency, 504-556-0809 or davemietteINSagency.com.
CNC Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, CNC provides patient-centered care for your entire family. CNC Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. It is draft day. That's right. It is the first round of the NFL draft tonight, and of course, getting back to some semblance of normalcy when it comes to a little bit of a live sport. It's not a live sporting event, but at least something that we all can get around the TV and radio, whatever you want to do and enjoy. And I'm looking forward to it tonight. I'm sure a lot of you are, especially after what we've been dealing with over the last 6 weeks or so. To break it down for us tonight, one of my favorite guests. I just think he's so knowledgeable on every single sport. He can do it all. He can do play-by-play. He does radio, TV, great writer, and of course, you know, one of the guys behind the scenes that makes CressidySports.com go. And I'll say it again, CressidySports.com. If that's not on your homepage or you're not looking at that every single day, you're missing out on good old-fashioned New Orleans sports writing because they got you covered on that. Jude Young joins us tonight. Jude, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Appreciate all the kind words.
Oh, it's absolute truth.
We are so grateful to have the draft right now because we're covering it. Great analysis, and certainly through the weekend we're going to have a whole lot more as we're anxious to see how the LSU players, so many, are going to be drafted this weekend, and obviously what the Saints do.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, again, the radio show on a little bit of a hiatus because of COVID-19, but tell the folks about it anyway.
Right. We're doing really well over at 106.1 Nash Icon, but right now on hiatus for the safety of everybody involved at Cumulus New Orleans, but we'll be back soon. Weeknights at 7 o'clock, Ken Trahan and I host nightly sports talk, and of course the Tailgaters on Saturday mornings will be back soon as well with Ken along with Ed Daniels, and that's right around the corner, so we're excited about that.
And of course, before you know it, you'll be calling UNO games again.
Right, recruiting time. A lot of signings coming. UNO gaining another commitment today, as a matter of fact. So that's been happening. Recruiting in football as well. People have been watching that. Tulane just got a really good transfer. I saw on the basketball side. So some sense of normalcy going on, planning for the future.
Yeah, Ron Hunter's doing pretty good. He's got a bunch of transfers coming in. I think I counted 4 so far. Of course, LSU had the top 5 class in all of college basketball. Then they just signed a big center, within the last few days. And of course, you mentioned UNO. So, yeah, it's a long way from basketball, but it is what it is. Let's talk some draft, huh? First of all, we're going to get into the Saints, but let's just talk about the challenges first that the teams are facing in terms of player evaluations. Because we know that this has become information overload with the NFL in terms of wanting to know everything about a prospect before they ultimately pull the trigger and draft them. We saw GMs in the beginning hesitating, saying, look, we're not ready. We need to push this back. Again, the inability to be able to work guys out face-to-face has really been an interesting scenario for the NFL, which, again, has now kind of morphed into this, having the chance to be able to get the visits, having a chance to be able to see these guys up close and personal. Now you're really kind of relying on your contacts more than anything else. And then, again, your ability to kind of decipher what a player's doing over the internet when you're doing a Zoom or a FaceTime type interview with those individuals. And then there's the individuals that didn't go to the pro days or didn't have pro pro days or didn't go to the combine or weren't invited to the combine. And of course, those tapes that are coming out as well. So this is really kind of, for at least this generation of the NFL, this is a different animal. Maybe if you look about it 30 years ago,
right,
they would have been able to deal with it a little bit easier because they didn't have the technology that we have now, and it wasn't maybe as much of a deep dive that you see with the players that you see now. Talk about what they've had to overcome and your thoughts on how this will go tonight.
You touched on a lot of the keys to what's affected a well-oiled machine and how 32 NFL teams function, because they do have the opportunity to have so much contact with these players, both from a personal perspective and really figuring out whether they're healthy and what kind of physical abilities they really bring to the next level. You lose a lot of that, even though those who were at the combine, that was very important, but a lot of people skipped portions or all of the combine workouts. You didn't get that personal contact. You're doing a lot of things on Zoom and Skype and talking to people online versus having that personal contact, those visits that you're allowed to have, so that you can get one-on-one weekends at times with prospects, so you really get to know them. So that's taken away. But at the same time, like you said as well, maybe a silver lining, you've got to look for one in situations like this. Information overload isn't as big of a deal this year.
Right.
So you're going to rely more on your scouts. You're going to rely on the film and what these guys prove they could do at the college level. That's really going to help the major college guys, the Power 5 conference guys. It will hurt those below that level. But in the end, at least at the top of the draft, I think guys are going to rely on what their eyes showed them on the college level, what guys were able to do, what they were able to accomplish there, and not overthink it so much. But sure, it certainly hurts projections.
I've been talking about this really since we figured out that the draft was going to go forward. It was going to be more virtual, and of course, again, all the offices and the facilities were shut down. When you look at the diamonds in the rough, when you look at the guys with the red flags, when you look at the guys from smaller schools, to me, those are the ones that suffer here. And those are the ones that I think will fall in the draft some. Because again, unless you've got a contact within that coaching staff that you really trust, or as a scout that's been watching a guy for a few years, have their eye on him. In a lot of cases, the film, when you start matching up film of guys that are playing at the lower levels, it's hard to project what they can do in the NFL because they're dominating on those particular levels. Some of those guys, I think, will fall. The guys with the red flags, at this point, do you really take a chance on a high pick on a guy that may have had red flags in whether it be on the field, off the field, whatever it was, and no matter how talented they are, especially if you haven't had a chance to be able to get up close and personal with that individual and kind of get to know them and then have that vision for them? How do you think that works out with those type of players?
It'll play a bigger role this year than I think it's played in many, many years, because it's so important to understand the two major red flags, which are medical, and you don't get your doctors to get their hands on these potential draftees and know where they stand if they already have an injury history, or especially a recent injury. Tua Tagovailoa is obviously the big story there with his injury issue, but in the end I think he's going to be drafted very high because he's gotten enough testing from high-level medical authorities that people trust, but at the same time it's a big investment, so that's why it's been such a major story. And of course the off-the-field red flags, you're really trusting on your connections as far as people within programs. You're not only talking to the coaches, but you're talking to trainers, managers, roommates, anybody you can get your hands on, so you're trying to do that from a distance. That is even harder. So yes, I think the red flag players, anybody that you hear might have a medical, might have an issue off the field or multiple ones in their past and arrests and things like that, they're definitely going to fall further because you're going to go with the surer things higher in the draft, especially the first 2 days, those first 3 rounds.
I will say the NFL really has thought this out, and the Saints as well. In terms of the virtual draft, the backups that they have now, again, cell phone, a landline, obviously, again, from a standpoint of, how they're going to use this over the internet, having I think it's WebEx is going to be able to handle the draft. So again, more of a private company, not doing maybe Zoom where they've seen they've had problems in terms of people hacking in. Then you look at the situation with what Mickey Loomis talked about the other day, something I mentioned on having backup power. So having a generator, especially in a place like the metropolitan New Orleans area, where again we've had power outages, whether it's a rainstorm or not. So I think that the clubs have thought it out the NFL has, but again, it's unknown. You've done it. I'm done it. We're in radio.
Right.
You're broadcasting games. I'm broadcasting radio shows. things happen. Whether you're doing it over the internet with, again, a high-priced piece of equipment, or you're doing it over a phone line, it is what it is. Things technically happen when you're not in a situation where you're broadcasting over the net, or you're broadcasting via phone or whatever.
Right, we're used to it
Yeah.
too. We've had every scenario happen to us.
Are you kidding me?
It's amazing what we've been through, and when I think about it, it's what I've told people who've talked to me. It's like, what's Jerry Jones of the Cowboys, an older gentleman who doesn't have that technical savvy? He's at home by himself. He doesn't even have his own son, who's basically the owner in waiting, Stephen Jones. Just an example. So the older the people involved, and owners clearly want to be heavily involved, if they have issues, they're going to be left out of the loop in these very important decisions. It's going to slow down potentially the draft. It's going to lead to stoppages, which the NFL says we're prepared for that potential to happen because you can't control it. And that's why I have a little bit of a complaint as to how the NFL has handled this. I thought the Saints had a great idea with the Dixie Brewery site, and I think that they really could have used their own facilities with a select 3 or 4 people, the top decision makers, could have been tested the day before and slept there overnight and stayed there all weekend at their facilities. That's easy to do after it's already clearly gone through a heavy cleaning process. I think they've gone overboard because of public perception involving social distancing, and I hope that isn't costly to teams, because the lifeblood of NFL teams in the end, you've got to be successful drafting a football team. You have a bad draft, you pay for it for years.
And general managers lose their jobs.
Right.
Head coaches lose their jobs. I mean, regimes are again either made or they decline and ultimately get cut because of what happens with the draft. So I agree with you there. And I agree with you as well. I thought the Saints had a great plan. And again, they were lucky to have that building available. But as you mentioned, look, a lot of these facilities are so big, they could have put people in multiple offices, spreading people out, social distancing, and would have been able to, again, have the draft. Now, how about, again, the conversations that lead up to picks and the debate that goes back and forth and the information that's out there to the individuals who ultimately have to make the decision? That, to me, is going to be the sticking point going forward. You're going to have to trust the guys that are getting you that information, and how quickly do they get that information to you? Because before, it could be a conversation for 10 minutes or so based on what you want to do. Now, you got to pretty much have your ducks in a row, and everybody can't be talking over each other when you're talking about over the internet.
And those heavily involved conversations happen no matter how many mock drafts you do and how much you trust your big board from war room to war room. We don't have war rooms now because it's all virtual, and we don't have that one-to-one contact or that group think that comes into play where it's like, where do we decide between player A and player B? Let's talk to the area scout about player B, about what he thought about this and fit for what our system is one more time, just to make sure, because we're choosing between the two. Because it isn't just laid out right there that you already know a predetermined plan of who you're going to pick between one or the other. And I know the Saints have made it pretty clear, I thought Mickey Loomis did earlier this week, that they're going to be aggressive as they have been over the past decade in the draft, and they clearly would like multiple players potentially to move up. But if you're going to make a move up and give up future capital, future draft picks, maybe even players, who knows, you've got to be able to communicate with one another to make 100% sure if this scenario plays out that you really want to do it. And because you're limited in doing that, I think it's going to cause some serious problems for teams just like the Saints who want to be aggressive.
Plus, day 2, day 3, when the clock shrinks on you, being able to again disseminate the information quickly, come to a decision or a consensus, and then making a decision and getting to the NFL. That's the hard part as well, where before you had the opportunity to be able to, speak among each other in that one area, in that quote unquote war room. And then the other part of it, trades. Right. Again, trying to be able to make a deal on trades. I got to believe, and I'd like to get your take on this, I got to believe a lot of the framework for trades are already made.
Sure, they have to be, and preparation is the most important thing this year to deal with this difficult scenario, because you've already had conversations with teams, your what-if scenarios after going through your mock drafts, and you've already set your big board and understood where you're going to go, and you're probably going to lean on that predetermination a little bit more than that last second, maybe changing of the minds that won't be able to happen because of lack of communication.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a total different, but it's the same for everyone.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an even playing field. And how these teams deal with the technology that the NFL's recommended and help them with, and at the same time how they're going to communicate between decision makers, that's going to play a crucial role and could make or break drafts this year as well. I think Saints fans should be pretty confident that the Saints are going to handle it well, because they've tried to stay ahead of things with the planning, and I have a feeling that in the end, we know how that room works. There's trust with Jeff Ireland and how he puts a board together,
Yes.
and there's an understanding that in the end, Sean Payton has to sign off on who he wants. He has a great deal of power in that organization, more than a lot of head coaches, and in the end, I think he understands who he wants, especially when we talk about the offensive side of the ball.
No doubt about it. Let's talk about positions of need. To me, linebacker, wide receiver, cornerback. To me, I like offensive guard or guard tackle, not guard center.
Right.
Okay, guard tackle. You need a swing guy there because, and then tight end. In the later rounds, and maybe even a defensive end, depending on, again, what the grade is on that. Although, again, I don't think this team is giving up on Marcus Davenport by any stretch of the imagination. What's on your board? What's in your bullpen here?
Well, I mean, obviously we can look at the Saints from a team that's considered by many to be the most complete roster in the league going into this draft, and maybe that is true. They're certainly at or near the top. I think it's very important to understand that linebacker isn't as important as it used to be in the NFL. True. A lot of times, a minority of the time, you're having just two of them on the field, and you happen to have one of the best in the league in Demario Davis, who can stay on the field all the time. But you did lose A.J. Klein. You have injuries last year, players coming off of them. Alex Anzalone injured a lot. Kiko Alonso, another ACL tear, his third. So I think linebacker is an important position, and we've heard some buzz about the Saints perhaps having interest in who people consider to be the two most highly rated players in the draft, Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma, and of course LSU's Patrick Queen.
Yes.
But there's been some smoke around interest in Jordan Brooks, a linebacker from Texas Tech as well. And all these guys are good athletes who can stay on the field. At the same time, still linebacker isn't as important as some other areas, but that seems to be a more pressing need. But you have to start thinking about 2021 as well. As much as we hear the Saints are all in on this season, this may be the final Drew Brees season. Right. We've seen the Saints live like this for a few years now. Right. At the same time, they have a good roster. There's no reason they can't stay competitive if this is Drew Brees' his last year in 2021 and beyond. And you got to start thinking of who do we have to replace next year, or who do we need a good backup that has potential that we can work with that may have to step in mid-season if we have injuries. I think the cornerback position behind Janoris Jenkins, we saw what an injury issue cost there, especially late in the playoff loss to Minnesota. That stands out. Jared Cook has been a bit injury-prone in his career. You mentioned tight end. They would like to have another weapon there because it's important in the offense. And even though they signed Emmanuel Sanders, I'd love to see them have somebody that's in the wings that can step up and be another weapon, whether he's a guy who's known for his speed or another big target who's got a great catching radius, who can win one-on-one 50-50 battles. And you mentioned offensive line. I think it's a great point that you made about the idea of guard, tackle versus guard center, because their sixth man, so to speak, is Nick Easton. He can play guard and center, and he's done so well in his career behind an obvious starting lineup. Who is their third tackle right now? Who can they trust to step in on either side? They re-signed the big contract for Andrus Peat. He can step out and play left tackle for you. We've seen Larry Warford play a little right tackle when Ryan Ramczyk missed some snaps, but that's not ideal. I think they really need to come out of this draft with a swing tackle. If the board says they wind up doing it on day two because there's value there, fine, but I think they really should try to come out with a young, talented guy who's experienced on the college level from day three, and I expect them to do so if they're not giving up a bunch of picks to move up in round one, which is certainly a possibility.
Now, Payton said in one of his press conferences, offensive line, cornerback, linebacker, wide receiver, kicking game. Now, I think the definition of what he's trying to say with kicking game is players that, again, are playing another position, but they excel in the kicking game.
Right,
okay?
And developmental players who are guys on day three in particular that you think can be a starter for you if everything works out right in a year or two, but they can help you have a championship-level special teams unit, guys who can run, guys who have played special teams units before, guys who have proven to be tough on the college level, even if they've been starters who haven't played special teams a lot and have that type that they can step in and do it. That's going to be the number one issue for rounds 4 through 7 for the Saints, and it has been the last couple of years, even though C.J. Gardner-Johnson wound up being the perfect pick because he wound up being able to step in and play a key role on defense in year one.
I would agree. Now, I think they're going to be very aggressive. Again, I think they'll be very targeted in this draft as well. They have 5 picks, but I can see them ending up with 3 or 4 players in this draft, not ending up with 5. Again, I can see them moving up, being aggressive there. I do think they'll get back into the second round if possible, and that could mean giving up picks from next season. I can see them moving back a little bit in the draft, maybe if the player's not there, but that's not their MO.
Right.
It's really not their MO. Their MO is, and even Loomis said it yesterday, 6 spots ahead, looking to see what's going on, scenarios there that they feel, again, again, they have the capital to be able to move up. Now, moving all the way up into the top 10, that's a pipe dream at this point.
Right.
But again, I think they'll be aggressive. What do you think happens? What do you think happens tonight? What do you think happens over the next 3 days?
I think the Saints are more than likely to try to move up at least 5 spots and target a player that they feel like has fallen. Most of the time when you look at the NFL draft in a given year, you hear that there's 15 to 25 true first-round talents, and then there's a big bunch in that next level. Some get drafted late in the first round, a lot of them. There's not a lot of difference between a guy taken early in the second round and somebody maybe middle of the third. The Saints probably have their top list, their top so-and-so players. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20. And if they feel like one that's of particular value is slipping, and especially someone who's going to help them right away, wouldn't surprise me at all if they do that. I almost expect it. And depending on how much it costs for them to do that, maybe you talk about round 2. Let's say they have to move up to make something happen in round 1 tonight. Maybe on day 2 of the draft, they go ahead and they're able to get a trade done here in round 1 using this year's picks. They might use next year's first or second to try to move up into day 2 of the draft. Wouldn't surprise me if both happen.
Right. No, I would agree. I heard Jeff Duncan say something on Corey Johnson's show today that I thought resonated with me, and pretty much what I've been saying as well, but didn't really make it as concise as he did. Saints want to get at least 3 players in the top 100, and that makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
3 players in the top 100 and are willing maybe to give up part of next year's draft to do that, and also, again, part of this year's draft to be able to get 3 players in the top 100.
It's more than likely if the Saints stay put and pick at number 24 that they're then going to try to trade into early in the second round for somebody with their first round pick for next year. That's a scenario I can see happening because then they may feel like, okay, there's real value for us to do that. We expect to be picking at the end of the first round next year because we're a championship level team.
Right.
So there's no reason for them not to be aggressive and do that. A team that maybe stands out, for example, is the Indianapolis Colts, who have 2 second-round picks in the top half. I think it's 34 and 44 overall. It's teams like that that make sense. Miami comes into this draft loaded with picks, but of course, as we speak, are trying to trade up to get their hands on Tua, so that may cost them some of that draft capital. But at the same time, they might still have day 2 picks that can help the Saints, and they can use some ammo from next year to make that happen. And I totally endorse that because in the end, yes, you want to think about the future, but you do have a deep roster, and you do have Drew Brees still back here this year, and you need to try to win and get him help and get this roster help to make 2020 happen.
We know that this is a time of year where there's a lot of smoke, right?
Right.
I mean, a lot of, every general manager, every head coach, every scout, they need a priest because all they've been doing is lying for the last month and a half.
Sure.
With that said, there's a lot of talk out there that there will be a lot of veterans that will be moved again in this draft, especially maybe tonight and tomorrow as well. How aggressive do you think the Saints will be in maybe using, again, a veteran at a position of strength, of great depth, to maybe either bring get another draft pick, or possibly using a draft pick to go get a veteran to be able to plug and play?
I think the latter scenario is much more likely. I think the Saints look at their roster and those players of value they want to keep and move forward with. They would have already made moves earlier in the offseason to maybe unload them and give themselves that draft capital to work with ahead of time. So it's much more likely they may target a value veteran. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of movement with that tonight in day 1 of the draft, but come day 2, even though apparently so far not a lot of movement, Leonard Fournette, of course, a great local interest. Jacksonville's clearly looking to move him. I don't think he necessarily fits the Saints, and I don't want to bag on his character, but I think he's, you could maybe call him a prima donna a little bit based on his behavior and what we've seen. Saints don't need that in the locker room necessarily, and they certainly work to not have that type of personality in the locker room in the last 4 or 5 years, but I could see him being traded. I think Jacksonville's pretty adamant on making that happen. The best name I think that can really help a team really doesn't help the Saints, and that's Trent Williams of the Washington Redskins, a true left tackle. The teams that don't get tackles in what's a very deep first round of tackles, there's at least 4, maybe up to 6 quality first round level talents. Teams that don't get that done might be aggressive and be willing to use a second round pick to get Trent Williams. I think that's what the Redskins are trying to pull off.
Yeah. Let's get back to Fournette because that's where I was going to go next.
Sure.
Some are saying 4th round pick, 5th round pick for Fournette. I mean, again, we'll have to see how that kind of bears out. But for that low of a price, do you think that maybe the Saints could have some type of interest going forward?
I think once you get to day 3, you at least have to entertain the notion because of his great talent. I thought that Latavius Murray should have played more last year, especially when we knew Alvin Camaro was less than 100%, especially when Alvin Camaro flat out missed time and couldn't play. But at the same time, the Saints are making those decisions based on what they think makes them the best 11 on the field throughout the course of a game on each side of the ball. And Murray's, in their eyes, probably a solid player, worth the price that they paid for him in free agency when they couldn't retain Mark Ingram. But at the same time, maybe they could feel like they could do better there, because Fournette had a fantastic year last year on a bad team and proved he could be an every down back like everybody thought he could.
He could catch the ball in the backfield.
And he caught the ball a lot last year. But at the same time, again, if you're giving up somebody of worth, whether it's a draft pick on the 3rd day or a veteran, if there's a swap that could really work out, you're also taking on a decent sized salary for a former high first-round pick, 4th overall, and again, you don't get to keep him for very long, and it's highly unlikely the Saints are going to re-sign them. If they're going to spend money on a running back, it's going to be next offseason on Alvin Camaro.
And if I'm not mistaken, you would have the 5th-year option on him, okay, and then he would become an unrestricted free agent. So there would have to be a situation where you either pick up the option or you try to sign him long-term, and then comes in the situation with Alvin Camaro. Again, it sounds good on paper, Fournette, Camaro as a 1-2 punch, but ultimately, again, what is Camaro going to be looking for? What would Fournette be looking for down the line? But that's a pipe dream. Let's talk about Camaro right now. And what do you think happens with Camaro? With McCaffrey getting 4 years, $64 million, an average of $16 million a year. Obviously, he set the market for running backs. They are similar in terms of the skill set. Although, again, we know that McCaffrey's been used much more, much better runner than especially inside runner than maybe Camaro is. What scenario do you see happening in the future with Alvin Camaro this year and forward?
You know, I really don't have a crystal ball on that, because you really need to see 2020 and how it plays out, because you have to see if he can stay healthy. You can have to see if last season was a blip on the radar, because he had serious injury concerns in college, going back to Alabama, a little bit at Tennessee as well, and then it crops up again. And he's a guy who, from the waist down, isn't built like the typical running back. He's got spindly legs, thinner lower body, and he's much more prone to being injured as a result. That's a real issue. I just think the Saints are going to wait it out and see what they can do and what they can get out of him this season, and they can always use a tag of some sort if they feel like it's worth it, and then deal with a long-term contract from there or get some sort of compensation from him. I think that's not a lock, but pretty close to it, how I think the Saints are going to handle it. While they might look at other players on the roster that they trust as far as how they're going to age well. Running backs simply don't age well.
Yeah, and look, the new rules within the CBA really lean toward the clubs now. You know, if you hold out, then and you know, especially if you're a player that is still within your first 4 years, you lose that year. So you come back, instead of an unrestricted free agent, you become a restricted free agent. So the Saints would have an opportunity to have right of first refusal there. Now they could get outbid, but they'd also get a draft pick in return. If you look at the possibility of using a franchise tag on him to be able to buy one more year, well, again, then you just have to figure out what the average is going to be of the top 5 running backs. It'll be interesting to see how they play that out. But you don't think they're going to try to sign him this year? You think they're going to wait it out and see how he does in 2020?
I think they may look to sign him this year, but I doubt very seriously it's for the money he's going to be looking for. This is a guy who was only a 3rd-round pick, so he hasn't made a lot of money in the league. I mean, I think Camaro probably values himself as somebody that's an 8-figure-a-year player, and I don't believe the Saints are willing to pay him that much money on a long-term contract. But what you mentioned, if he has a great year this year on a franchise tag and they can't work out something they believe is reasonable, I could definitely see them doing it and saying, okay, we'll deal with that and we'll work the cap other ways, because we're still trying to win right now. If the Saints feel confident they're still in a win now at the very top level of win now mode, whether it's with or without Breeze come 2021, I just don't think they trust him from a health perspective enough to make a long-term investment, unless it's something that has limited, and this is the key, we always have to remember that with the NFL, limited guaranteed money. How much will Camaro agree to gamble on himself on if it's only 30% of the contract is guaranteed money, but it pays big money that says if you stay healthy and you're on the field, you're going to make a lot of money because we're going to keep you because we need you. Well, how much is he willing to gamble on that front? Because that's going to be the big argument between his agent and the team.
I would agree. You know, to me, and I've said it before, I think between $8 million and $11 million is right where I think he needs to be. I think if you start getting to 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 million, I think you're overpaying for him. You know, and look, I understand his skill set fits this offense perfectly, but then we don't know what this offense is going to be in 2 years from now.
Right. I think he's going to be able to fit any offense because
Right.
he's so versatile. If the Saints are running more spread concepts with a running quarterback, whether it's Taysom Hill,
Yes.
or who knows what they do from
Right.
that perspective
Sure.
in the draft or in the next year or two, because they need at least one more quarterback on the roster. Hey, if they're doing that, he can still fit in because you can use him in motion, use him in the backfield. He's still a threat in the slot. Because he's so versatile, he will have a role if he's healthy. And if he plays like he played in 2018, you're going to want him on the team no matter who the quarterback is.
No doubt. Jude Young of CrestCitySports.com is our guest tonight. I'm your host, Eric Asher. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. We'll take a break. We come back. A lot of people are wondering what's going to happen with the LSU players. We'll talk about that next here on Inside New Orleans Sports.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Experiencing rough weather with a bad roof can be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be.
Suburban Roofing, because when it comes to roofing, there is a difference.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Jude Young of CrestCitySports.com is our guest. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Again, special thanks to our underwriters who make this show possible. All right, let's talk LSU. Look, for as long as I've been around, and I've been around a lot longer than you, it's Saints don't pick LSU players, okay?
Right.
You know, we saw Al Woods a few years ago. We saw Will Clapp. Again, Devery Henderson was one that, again, was in the Haslett era that ended up sticking around through and really excelled in the Peyton era. I believe this is the year that the Saints pick LSU players. I just think it makes sense. And I'll give you a couple reasons why, and I'd love your take.
Okay.
First of all, I think that when you look at the positions of need, the players that are coming out this year fit the Saints' positions of need, what they're looking for. The relationship. We just went through that. This is going to be a relationship draft.
Right.
Who you can trust to give you the honest depiction of what's going on with a player. You've got Coach O, who's coached with Peyton. You've got Greg McMahon, who's coached with Peyton. You've got Bill Johnson, that's coached with Peyton. You even got Bobby April, who consulted with again LSU, that has a relationship with Peyton, obviously the Saints. So again, they know the type of player that Peyton is looking for. We heard Ogeron say this week, the Saints culture is our culture.
Right.
It's the same culture. If you're looking at it from an offensive standpoint, well then they've already got the terminology, they've already got the concepts and the offense. So again, you can look at a player and see what the vision of that player could be in your particular offense. And then, like I said, you look on the defensive side of the ball, between Bill Johnson and of course special teams with McMahon, these guys have had an opportunity to see these players up close and personal. I think if there's ever an opportunity with, again, the limited amount of contact one-on-one that coaches and scouts have been able to have, since the outbreak, that this may be the year that they go with LSU players because of familiarity and also the ability to be able to trust guys that they have relationships with. We saw this with Ohio State forever, right? The relationships with Urban Meyer, the relationships with the coaches at Ohio State, and how they've went out and drafted a lot of Ohio State players. Now, again, that has a lot to do with the fact that they had great recruiting classes. And they were one of the top teams in the nation. Well, you could say the same about this LSU team now. Great recruiting classes, top team, one of the top teams in the nation, coming off, again, the greatest season in college football history. What's your take on LSU players? Because a lot of people out there say to themselves, man, that they need to take LSU players, especially with the crop that's coming out of like 18 players. We'll get into a moment. 18 players that are NFL ready in some form or fashion.
You just captured it. It was the idea of talent, connection, and culture. All of that matters as to who you're bringing in your organization. Hope can seamlessly fit in as you develop them, as you hopefully get a lot out of them as quickly as possible. I think over the years that not that Les Miles didn't have a great culture, but maybe the way the offense was, for example, and just the way the draft played out from a defensive side of the ball perspective, where there were really no question marks, no matter who the coordinator's been, basically since the turn of the century, and how good LSU has been. It just hasn't worked out, especially in the Loomis Payton and now the importance of Jeff Ireland in a decision-making process for the era of what's been success for the Saints and a lot of good drafts, especially recently. Just because there's so many LSU players in the draft, and particularly at some key areas that we'll get to in a moment that could really help the Saints. And sure, I could see this being a better chance of that happening this year. But I do think one thing the Saints probably have taken into account in the past is when you draft a player who's local. There's more distractions, there's more pressure, and sometimes you don't want to deal with that. You'd rather grab a player and bring him from someplace else. That's why I think guys like, for example, Tyrann Mathieu could have helped this team the past couple of years, and he was available. I think even though he's really cleaned up his life and become a leader and a pillar in society, great with charity, and a leader in the locker room, that wasn't always the case, and the Saints were like, well, let's just stay away from that. That could very well go back to the Fournette discussion as well, and saying, like, let's not deal with that. But there are a lot of high character talents, especially when you talk about the first 3 rounds of the draft, that there are LSU guys that are going to go off the board, and they could certainly help the Saints.
All right, let me just go through this list very quickly for you guys. Joe Burrow, who will be the first overall pick, Cavalon Chasson, Justin Jefferson, Patrick Queen, Christian Fulton, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Grant Delpit, Lloyd Cushenberry, Jacob Phillips, Damian Lewis, Shadiq Charles, Thaddeus Moss, Rashard Lawrence, Michael Divinity, Blake Ferguson, Braden Fehoko, Derek Dillon, Stephon Sullivan. 18 players right there. 18 goes to show you again what LSU has lost.
No question.
Okay, in terms of what they've lost, guys that could have come back for another year, guys that ended up leaving for their senior year. But that is in itself is a who's who, and the majority of those players will be drafted. Those that are not are going to be primary undrafted free agents.
And a very good chance that all of those players will be drafted. Even Sullivan, who lost playing time to Thaddeus Moss because Moss was simply that good and that reliable. He's a developmental prospect who can really catch the ball. You can split him out as a weapon in the offense. So you look at that and you realize that LSU's king of the hill right now. And I think LSU players in general might be overdrafted, especially in a year like this, because that's what you have in front of you. These guys are winners as a result of
you
the
said game
success.
tape, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to show up on game tape.
Huge games. Look at the schedule. That's why LSU had, maybe they're not the greatest single season team of all time, but they had the single best season of all time in college football. I mean, it was impressive from Texas all the way through the conference schedule and clearly the postseason. Then you've got so much tape of these players going up against the best of the best in college football, fellow top 100 draft picks. It's really going to help all of these players out in the draft.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, Miami has the record 2004, 6 first round of most in draft history. Does LSU beat that tonight?
Boy, that's a tough one. They really could, because clearly we know Burrow is going to be a first-round pick. I think Justin Jefferson, Chasson well, Patrick Queen. And then you get into whether Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who values him in a way that maybe late in the first round, if Kansas City stays put at the very end, for example, you could see it. I think boards are probably going to have very different views of Grant Delpit. I think Grant Delpit's overrated. I think that there are issues with tackling, and he's overrated as a coverage safety from what I saw. Again, you got a lot of film on that. It may hurt him, but it only takes one team to fall in love with the talent. He is the Thorpe Award winner. And Christian Fulton's an interesting case. He could go in the top 20 somewhere in the teens, or be a second-round pick, because there's so many cornerbacks in this draft after Jeffrey Okudah, who's clearly the #1 corner. C.J. Henderson's probably the #2. After that, from 3 to 10, if any of those guys get drafted somewhere in the first round, it wouldn't shock you, and Fulton's one of them. They could get there, but it really depends on, I think, the teams in the last third of the draft in the first round, as far as who they might fall in love with when you talk about a Delpit, maybe a Fulton, and clearly Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Ohio State has the record of total number of players selected in a draft. It's 14. The most first round picks LSU's ever had is 4, as I mentioned. The largest draft class that LSU's ever had was 9 in 2013 and 2014. You think they'll eclipse that tonight?
They will definitely eclipse that throughout the course of this draft, having double-digit players drafted. And I would say they're probably a slight favorite to beat that Ohio State record. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they get to 50.
Yeah. Now, Burrow will match Cam Newton because we know, again, it's already fait complete. The Cincinnati Bengals will make Joe Burrow the #1 overall pick in the draft. He will match Cam Newton as the only other player to win a national championship, the Heisman Trophy, and be the #1 overall pick in the subsequent draft overall. Again, and of course, he is the second quarterback that will be going #1. Of course, the first one didn't work out too well out in Oakland.
Right.
So
Jamarcus
Russell. So, but again, interesting times for the LSU Tigers, and it's not just LSU because we're going to go into this now. You guys do a great job at CrescentCitySports.com of breaking down the players in the state. And part of that comes from your fantastic high school coverage. Right. You've watched these guys grow up, from high school into college. There are a lot of really good players coming out of the state, whether, again, they played high school ball here and went elsewhere, or, again, ended up staying in Louisiana and playing here in the state. Amik Robinson is one of the guys that's really being looked at. L'Jarius Sneed, both guys defensive backs, Louisiana Tech. Talk about him.
Robertson in particular, it's going to be interesting to see. He could somehow be drafted late in the second round maybe. He could fall to day 3. And the reason why he would fall is simple. He's very small. He's 5'8". He's slight. Will he hold up? Can he help you in run support? Because what he can do is he can flat out cover and he can play any coverage. He's tough as nails. You're seeing a lot of comparisons with him as the true cornerback version of Tyrann Mathieu. Ed Ogeron mentioned that he wishes he would have signed him. He offered him too late. He winds up at La Tech because he was so small. But out of Thibodeau High, he's been as amazing as he expected to be a great college player. And I think he's going to be a good NFL player. He probably winds up in round 3, and he should. And I'm really glad you brought up Sneed. Sneed's somebody who was good at corner, has sub 4.4 speed, but he also played safety last year just to accommodate the talent La Tech had in the secondary. No surprise when it comes to speed and talent. Louisiana School has it even at their level and has multiple draftable secondary players. Sneed's the type of guy, it depends on where you see him fitting. I think more people are looking at him as a corner, but now he has much more experience playing in space. When you're playing on the boundary for La Tech, they were playing a lot of tight man coverage. He got to play in space a whole lot more, so he has experience with both. And with those measurables, he's somebody that an NFL team wants to get in there and work with. And that versatility is only going to help him make it in the league. And maybe he finds a place where he becomes a star. It wouldn't shock me. He's that physically gifted. Yeah.
Tulane, again, we're not sure how many players will be drafted, but they have players that have a chance to be drafted. If not, will be priority 1 drafted free agents. First would be, again, Darnell Mooney. Who tore it up at the combine. I think he put himself on a lot of teams' radar in a very, very deep wide receiver draft. Your thoughts?
Mooney is extremely explosive with the ball in his hands. His problem has been dropping the football, and he's not a big guy either. So maybe you think he's a slot receiver only, but he is somebody who can stretch the field. If he does fall out of the draft, it's because it's so deep at wide receiver, by far the deepest position. And you talk about relationships and exposure. The Saints are probably going to be looking pretty close at the Tulane players who don't get drafted as well. And Mooney could be the type of guy, if the Saints, especially if the Saints aren't able to address another receiver for the future, which I think a lot of fans wish they would. Mooney's the type of guy they definitely like to get into camp and see if they can develop, because his playmaking ability and straight line speed, you can't teach.
What about Jalen McCleskey? Now, again, he had a tape where I think he ran a 4.240. Now, again, look, whether the scouts believe that or not, we don't know. We know he's a fast guy. Is he draftable, or is he going to be an undrafted free agent?
I think he's probably an undrafted free agent because he's falling victim to this year being one so deep at wide receiver. But he'll definitely get an opportunity in a camp because he's another guy who can make plays in space. And he has the background, of course, J.J. McCleskey, former Saint, his father on Tulane's coaching staff. That's why he transferred there. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Saints gave him a look as well and tried to grab him as an undrafted free agent. A guy who really stands out to me is Thakarius Keys. I think he's somebody who, because he's so long and physical and played in a heavy passing league, he's experienced playing man-to-man against talented receivers who wind up being NFL players. He winds up getting drafted maybe 6th or 7th round. If he doesn't, I'd certainly like to see the Saints bring him in because I think he's somebody who might be able to make it in the league.
Some guys that went out of state, we're going to get back in state in a moment, but had decent careers. What was it? Douglas Coleman, the safety out of Texas Tech.
He's good in space, and he's somebody that probably is undrafted. The guy that I want to bring up is Cameron Dantzler. Because you talk about videos of pro days versus what you actually did at the combine. He ran 4.64, very disappointing, at the combine. He has his pro day over in Hammond, which is just on video, and he claims he runs a 4.38. That is a huge variance, and NFL teams have to figure out. I think it's probably the truth is somewhere in between, because you're not as successful as a number one corner in the SEC who's played well for multiple years if you're not quick enough and fast enough to keep up with the best, because he was matching up with number one receivers and even did well against Jamar Chase, where several other corners that are going to be drafted in the first 2 days didn't do so well this past year against Chase, who I think is the best wide receiver right now. If he were draft eligible, he would go ahead of CeeDee Lamb, who's rated number one. I think he's the best. That's how good he is. And Dantzler did well against him the past couple of seasons. So he's somebody I'm interested to watch, because he's 6'2", the biggest corner out of the highly rated guys. I think he can play in the league, even if he's a guy who has to play in more of a cover two, off-man coverage, zone coverage. He's a guy who has ball skills. St. Thomas Aquinas product, who was under-recruited and became a star, and I think he's going to be a good NFL player.
From John Everett went to Arkansas, Dejon Harris, the linebacker.
He's somebody that you want to bring into camp, or maybe if you have multiple late-round draft choices, you pick him in the 7th round and give him a shot, because he's so tough. He's undersized for the type of player that he was asked to be at Arkansas, and he was still the most productive player on their defense. And the thing about him that you like is you can put him in space. Can he cover the slot? You want to figure that out. Somebody's going to bring him in to see if he can do that, because if he can cover tight ends and slot wide receivers, that would up his value, because he's the type of guy that would be a perfect fit as a core special teams guy.
Malcolm Roach went to Texas from Madison Prep.
You know, he's the type of guy who has the quickness you look for as a three technique, a gap shooting defensive tackle. But what really hurts him is he's sub 300 pounds and he has short arms. And they say that that is a huge problem for being draftable. If he does, it's going to be a very late round draft pick. I think just his measurables, he has to be very quick off the snap and win shooting the gap at the snap to be an NFL player. And it's going to be pretty tough for him to pull that off.
From UL, from University of Louisiana Lafayette, Robert Hunt.
Robert Hunt, somebody who had some off the field issues, but the last couple of years on the field, he's been as good as any single blocker in college football. Now, because he played in the Sun Belt and because of those issues off the field, he's only maybe more than likely a day 2 pick, but he's somebody who could wind up being a Pro Bowl caliber player. Right. He played right tackle for them in a run-oriented offense. They think he's going to move the guard. I think he's a mauler, and when you look at him, you start thinking, boy, the Saints, especially if they have information. Guard tackle. Right. Especially, you know, at least you can do that on the right side. And he's somebody that you can look at and go, maybe we have relationships in state, because it's not that far away, that says you can trust this character. He's matured because he's a stud, and if he keeps his nose clean off the field, he's going to be a stud on the field.
Raymond Calais, the running back.
He's somebody you look at as a late round pick. I've seen a couple mock drafts thinking the Saints could pull the trigger late on him, because he's somebody who, and again, they don't throw the ball enough in the offense to see if he can be a 3-down guy. Based on his size, you want to see if he can be a 3rd round back. You don't ask him to pass protect so much, but he's one of those guys who can make one cut and make big plays happen because he has good burst. It'll be fun to see where he winds up. He could surprise.
All right, last guy, Chase Forcade. I mean, look, the guy's a winner. Okay, you can talk about his size, but we got a guy that plays in that dome that has size issues. He's a heck of an athlete. You know, a lot of people think that he's going to end up in Canada and have to work his way back into the NFL, but you never know. In an NFL that's going with more of a versatile, mobile quarterback, if he'll get at least a shot. What do you think happens with him?
You just said it. He's a winner. He's somebody who put on the field at Rummel, and he made them a championship-level program. And he lived up to his great potential as a dual-threat quarterback. But he can throw the football. He can stand in there in the pocket, and he can make all the throws. He has a good arm, but he's even smaller than Drew Brees, and that's really going to work against him. You'd love to see him get a chance, and because he's played in a college spread offense, he's had some versatility in running RPOs and running the football a little bit. He might have to do that more to make it, unless he does go to a place like Canada where they spread the field and size doesn't matter as much.
Right. Where, again, I think he could excel.
Sure.
And look, we've seen other players go to Canada, excel, and then the NFL just can't, they can't ignore it. Especially if the NFL is going toward more of, again, the more athletic quarterbacks. You may see that down the line here. Let's grab a couple calls and we'll get back into it. Tom is in Metairie. Tom, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. How you doing, Tom?
Hey, guys. I don't know if you know, but I'm just wondering how many picks Carolina has. And don't you think Brady would favor some LSU players? I think Carolina needs a linebacker, and they also need a wide receiver. Let's see what you guys think. I'll hang up. Thanks.
I agree with him. I think that, again, he's going to take a hard look at players that he has a relationship with that can play his system,
right?
Which
and
is really Peyton's
familiarity is going to be important because Matt Rule, the head coach there at Carolina, who brought Brady along to basically be the head coach of the offense, he's going to run that defense. So he knows Baylor, he knows the Big 12, so he may lean towards those guys as far as guys that can play on his defense from his own team and understanding offensive players from that league better than anybody else. On the flip side, Joe Brady's had to scheme against the best defensive players in the league. Does he think that, the best defensive tackle in the draft, right? You talk about somebody out of Auburn who was just a stud all year long, but maybe doesn't have the perfect measurables. But if you watch that LSU Auburn game, he absolutely dominated in the first half. LSU had to change their scheme to deal with him. He was that good. Maybe that's a pick they make because Joe Brady said, look, I saw it. He's elite. He's a difference maker. So those type of things are going to happen, that familiarity, especially when these young decision makers come in and try to rebuild a team.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Toby is in Gretna. Toby, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. How you doing, Toby?
All right, Eric. Any chance the Saints might make a trade for Josh Rosen? And I'll hang up and thank you.
Interesting, because I've read a lot of rumors out there that, again, Miami, as you mentioned, is trying to shop picks here, and that there may be an opportunity to maybe get a guy like Josh Rosen. I'm going to say it on the record here. I just think he's in a bad system. I think that you put him with the right quarterback coach in the right system. I think he has a chance to excel. I'd love to get your take.
I'd love to know what Sean Payton's thinking to give you my take, because is he thinking the future is mobile quarterback, or is he thinking I have this developmental guy in Taysom Hill that I've fallen in love with, and I think maybe he really thinks he can be a starter in the league. Who knows what he really thinks? What he says is one thing, but behind the scenes what he really thinks right now is another. Or does he want to go with another guy with Josh Rosen has the type of skill set to be a Drew Brees, because he was able to play as a true freshman right away at UCLA. He runs a pro-style offense there and does a fine job. He's able to move in the pocket, and he's an accurate passer. But it just didn't work out with the whole weird situation in Arizona getting that #1 pick and deciding, hey, we can't pass up on Kyler Murray. He goes to a terrible tanking situation in Miami, and Fitzmagic happens. He's a guy who's played and able to go in there and was taking the shots and made them more successful than they really wanted to be, because now they're having to trade up in the draft to get that future quarterback. But that should tell you a lot. They're looking for their quarterback of the future, looking to move up. I wouldn't give up a whole lot, if anything, for Josh Rosen. I think most teams in the league are thinking the same.
Yeah, I think he's a bargain. I think he's one of those guys you're going to give a late-round pick for. Maybe he's a throw-in in a trade that you make.
Sure, a flyer. I could see a team taking a chance on him, but I don't know if the Saints aren't. Let me make it more clear. I think the Saints are moving towards looking for athletic quarterbacks. We think about the past infatuation with Pat Mahomes and the Saints almost taking him when they took Marshawn Lattimore. I think that's what Sean Payton envisions as the future, and Rosen isn't that type of quarterback.
We're going to get to that in just a moment. Let's take Robert's call before we do. Robert, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. All right, we lost Robert. Let's go there. All right, how likely is it the Saints take a quarterback in this draft? And then if they do, is it going to be the prototype Drew Brees type quarterback, or is it going to be the duplicate of the skill set of Taysom Hill? Now, I'm going to throw a name out to you. I've been talking about it for a few weeks now. Jalen Hurts.
I knew you were going to say Jalen Hurts, because we know the Saints have done all their due diligence on Jordan Love. If you're going to take him, you got to use that first round pick.
And they're not going to do that.
They're not going to do that. It would be shocking. And because there's so much work to be done with him, far more than what Pat Mahomes needed based on the system he played in. He's a true project. Yeah, so is Jalen Hurts, but when you talk about that, 88th pick overall, mid to late round 3, that's a completely different story. And what you like about a quarterback like him, he's built big and strong, and if you're really going to rely on Taysom Hill to be the guy, the backup quarterback who you're going to put in if something happens to Brees this time around, you don't want to lose that gadget in your offense. And I think Jalen Hurts can do all those things because he's an awesome athlete. And hey, I didn't think Taysom Hill would develop to be as reliable looking a quarterback, at least from this past preseason, that he was, considering the preseason before. I remember his disastrous start against the Cardinals. I thought he could never play quarterback in the NFL. But he developed. Jalen Hurts is much younger, and you could argue that he's up there in that range of level athlete and big enough and strong enough to be used in multiple roles as well. Go back to Cordell Stewart. He hated having to do it, but it's how he made it in the NFL and became a starting quarterback. I think Jalen Hurts' best scenario would be doing something like that, especially with a coach like Payton.
And I would not be surprised that other teams are looking at what the Saints did with Taysom Hill and saying, Jalen Hurts can play that same role.
Yeah, that's why I think he's going to go day 2 of the draft, even though he's nowhere near close to being able to play for you right now. As a quarterback only, he can help you in a lot of different ways. A creative staff is going to get their hands on him because he's such a good athlete, but he's also tough and a winner. His film blows you away as far as his ability to battle, take hits, come back, and then make big plays.
If they have to go with a veteran quarterback, I'm going to ask you the same question. Is it a more mobile RPO type quarterback, or is it a prototype for Drew Brees?
I think they're more likely going to have to go with a more of a pro-style passer. Going to be hard to find a Drew Brees prototype, but somebody that has played, that isn't going to kill you when he gets in there.
That they can keep the same system in place, right?
That's what Teddy Bridgewater did. He wasn't outstanding against the good defenses. Hey, the Saints played conservatively, protected the football, played smart team football and won games and went 5-0. That's what they're going to have to look for, because I don't think you're going to find somebody that has that sort of developmental talent as a dual threat out there in the veteran market at this point.
When I look at the draft and I look at, again, how this thing falls, the biggest obstacle for the Saints, and I've been saying this for about 2 weeks now, is Philadelphia at 21, Minnesota at 22 and 25. Because they have a lot of the same needs the Saints do. And I could see them snatching a player that would be in the Saints bullpen at 21 and 22.
Yeah, Philadelphia and Minnesota both need a wide receiver. Stephon Diggs traded by the Vikings, and they need to find somebody who can be a big play threat outside to replace him in that offense. It's crucial. And Philadelphia has struggled so much at receiver the past 2 years because of injuries. The aging and injuries of Alshon Jeffrey stand out. They need another target in that passing game. So if the Saints do like somebody like Justin Jefferson, who's going to be a great pro, they need to move in and grab that guy right then and there. But we also don't know how the Saints are grading certain receivers. Jalen Reagor is a big play threat from TCU. Denzel Mims tests well, and he's a jump ball specialist from Baylor, but he could be a whole lot more based on his physical abilities and his measurables. So those type of guys are going to be in that range. If the Saints are in love with one of them, they may have to move up and strike to grab them. They may have that guy, or whoever it is, rated right up there with the CeeDee Lambs of the world, who I think most people agree is the best receiver.
2 more questions for you. First of all, who do you think the Saints pick and where tonight?
I think the Saints wind up moving up into the teens somewhere. A name to watch, and he may not fall that far because he's such a big-time potential playmaker and was in college. I like Henry Ruggs more than I like Jerry Jeudy. And I think he's the type of guy with his explosiveness, but he's also well-built and can make things happen in space. I think he could be a real difference maker and be something more than even Ted Ginn at his best with the Saints was, because he's somebody you want to get the ball in his hands and he'll make things happen in short spaces. The Saints really want that. Brandon Cooks wasn't that. Henry Ruggs could be.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. If you're going to try to move out just outside the top 10, Ruggs is the target.
It makes so much sense. And, you know, somebody else who does. If people don't know what to do with Isaiah Simmons, because he's such an incredible athlete, but he doesn't have a position, the Saints could be in love with his versatility and feel like he's a difference maker. He can play linebacker, but he can stay on the field and do a whole lot of different things. Maybe the Saints have him rated as the best defensive player in the draft. I don't know, because he could at least fill a position of need.
No doubt. Got about 20 seconds. Gronk and Brady. You worried?
Yes. Not only Gronk and Brady, but they already had great receivers in that offense. I mean, they're loaded offensively, and they're probably going to address offensive line to protect Brady. You might have to outscore that team to beat them. They are good enough to make a charge at the division, no question about it.
Tell the folks about CrestCitySports.com.
Follow us tonight. We'll do a lot of informational tweeting and articles on what goes on in the draft and throughout the draft. At CCS Daily on Twitter. Ken Trahan's going to be really busy. Les East as well. That's at Ken Trahan at Les East. And I'm at Jude Young. We're going to have a lot to say because this draft's going to be interesting from a local school perspective and certainly from a New Orleans Saints perspective.
No doubt about it. Jude Young, thanks for being with us. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. You can also catch us statewide, Pelican Sports Network. That is 9 o'clock every Friday night. You catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, and the iHeartRadio app. That is noon to 2 weekdays. You can listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. All the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports can also be seen at ericasher.com. We'll also post this show, as we always do, on our social media platforms. Again, special thanks to our fantastic underwriters who make this show possible. Thanks to them. Also, thanks to the WLE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Naila Jones, Alex Chacon, and my fantastic director, William Hill. For Jude Young, I'm Eric Asher. Enjoy the draft. We'll break it all down for you next week on the next edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Thanks for watching.